To break this thing on down.
History was written by the victorious, and the victorious will often attempt to wipe out every trace of their history. There are
Let me
hundreds
plug these headphones in real quick so y'all can. I say, break it on down. I say.
History was written by the victor, and the victorious will often attempt to wipe out every trace of their illusion of amalgamation and of the influence the hearts and minds of the population. Join us as we dive deep into the primordial waters of alien. Dynasty of the New Kingdom of Egypt, formerly known as Amenhotep IV. His reign lasted 17 years, ending in 1334 BC. He was also the father of legendary King Tutankhamun and the husband of Queen Nefertiti. Akhenaten was labeled the heretic king for abandoning the Egyptian pantheon and introducing the ancient world to monotheism. This radical new religion worshipped the sun god Aten and was considered blasphemous by the priesthood. In these ancient times, Egypt was known by gods, so to speak, with Nefertiti ruled by Side. Together, they embodied the principles of divine masculine and feminine energies. They conducted themselves by the sacred laws of Ma'at, which emphasized truth, justice, balance, and morality. Although their enigmatic sculptures and reliefs have captured imaginations for eons, some still labeled destroyed Akhenaten's temples and defaced his statues. They reinstituted the role of the priesthood in traditional form of worship, but ultimately their attempt to erase King Akhenaten was a failure. This is but one example of history being erased, but this theme has been repeated. This strategy was instrumental in the Western world's rise to glory. A new tactic was employed for the first time in recorded history, which was chattel slavery. Slavery has existed since the beginning of time, and indentured servitude has been employed widely. But this new iteration of slavery was extremely cruel and barbaric by comparison. During the 15th and 16th centuries, European royalty was vastly outnumbered by commoner and slaves. In order to maintain power, they created a caste system to keep people divided. It is in this space where European elites conceptualize the contemporary concepts of class and race.
During the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking. Right? We call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? And Europe was killed before we figured out Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think the Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite looked around, realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another, or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, black folks who were enslaved Africans and the quote-unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people, right? So ultimately, the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans.
In order for this new form of slavery to operate smoothly, they had to completely dehumanize Africans, so they were seen as nothing more than animals. They had to convince the world that they were savages and had no culture or civilization. They did this by creating the myth of the Dark Continent to justify colonialism and legitimize the enslavement of Africans. They created the term sub-Saharan to suggest like Africans were only present below the Sahara. But if you look closely at the historical record, you will see that they are in fact indigenous to the entire continent and prevalent within the Mediterranean as well.
When referring to black Africans, the term sub-Saharan is also slightly inappropriate for the period, which is why I'm not using it, as black people weren't only present south of the Sahara Desert, and there is a lot of evidence for that. In the classical period instead, the Mediterranean is seen as an unifying sea, used and exploited by Greeks. The Mediterranean Sea is a connection to Africa, not a barrier. Now, because of this, the Cretan world had the presence of black people, which we find in the Minoic civilization, and the same can be said also about the Mycenaean world of mainland Greece. We see black individuals in Minoan representations of the Bronze Age, and because of the extreme diversity of representations, musicians, warriors, traders, etc., we can understand that they had entered fully into the Minoan social fabric. And as we said, we have a very similar situation with the Mycenaean world, starting from the 14th century BC, and by the 9th century, this would be commonplace.
Modern concepts of race and ethnicity can be tricky. The term black, as it in the old world, your tribal ties or nation state was the dominant factor of how one viewed himself and others. Skin color was but a superficial trivia.
Darwin essentially suggested or requiring the use of the term race. So I say there are populations, but no races, and I'm not the first person to, in a way that implies a level of discreteness, that the term race, curlier hair, less curly hair, yes, there were. There's notions of race as they were developed in Europe.
Egyptology and in 1912, German archaeologist Ludwig Burchard discovered the famous bust of Queen Nefertiti in a region of Egypt called Tel El Amarna. Queen Nefertiti in a region of Egypt called Tel El Amarna. It would later be unveiled to the general public in 1923. At the Egyptian Museum of Berlin in Germany, and became standard of beauty and a cultural symbol for Berlin and Egypt alike. However, sculpture has been the subject of heated debates, and many scholars have gone on record to question its authenticity. After 20 years of research, Henry Sterren, a Swiss historian, made the shocking revelation that the bust of Nefertiti is compelling evidence.
What first made the academics suspicious was the exceptional similarity of the sculptors. It bore no resemblance to any other 3,300-year-old busts from Egypt. I've no doubt in my mind that this is a fake, a copy, phony.
And imperialism. And in an attempt to do that, they claim to be the discoverers of many sets of different artifacts, one of them being this head. But in fact, what it was something created at the time or just afterwards to justify their ideas of colonialism and imperialism.
Artist Elizabeth Days unveiled a facial reconstruction based on the fraudulent Nefertiti bust, which further Europeanized her features. And in 2005, Dr. Zahi Hawass, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, announced the results of a digital reconstruction of the face of Queen Nefertiti's son, King Tutankhamun. However, the relief on the back of his royal throne, him and his wife, Queen Ankhesenamun, shows a dark brown skin tone and features that resemble populations found in modern-day Sudan and the Horn of Africa. With discrepancies so glaringly obvious, one has to wonder what other liberties have been taken behind closed doors. A concerted effort has also been made in Hollywood to whitewash ancient Kemet. Television and film have promoted the idea of European Egypt for decades. But when we look at the temple walls, the skin tones and hairstyles, such as afros, waves, braids, and locks. Indeed, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone and translation of the ancient hieroglyphs, original known as Medu Neter, made Western scholars rethink the narrative. The newly transcribed inscriptions revealed an advanced culture that had attained an exceptionally high level of development. They coined the term Sub-Saharan Africa as a way to separate the genius of Egypt from the rest of the continent. So began the attempt of scholars to remove ancient Egypt from Africa.
Many of the early archaeologists came to the study of ancient Egypt and ancient Nubia from the perspective of Semitic languages or the study of the Hebrew Bible. And it was very important to them to bring Egypt specifically into the sphere of biblical studies. And so they had to carve Egypt away from Africa to bring it into that sphere. And the way that they did that was they used race. So these early archaeologists effectively made ancient Egypt white in the sense that they made it part of a dominant Western culture, and ancient Nubia was separated from that. It was black. And this was how they took Egypt out of Africa and put it into this Semitic sphere, this biblical sphere.
They classified Egyptians as Caucasian, and this classification was given to modern Egyptians immigrating to the U.S. Dr. Mustafa Hefni, a self-proclaimed Black Egyptian, points out the irony of this racist and deceptive practice.
I came to the U.S. in 1978, and I became a U.S. citizen in 1985. When I became a U.S. resident, I was told by the Immigration and Naturalization that I am white. And I told them that I'm black, and they said, no, in this country, you are white. All Arabs in this country, all Arab immigrants are white. The attitude towards me changed completely after I went out publicly and rejected my white classification. In 88, I was told by him that I get people angry when I say that I'm Black Egyptian. If I just say that I'm Egyptian, I would get along. We don't have Egyptians of European descent in Egypt. We have a population which is basically a mixture of ancient Egyptian blacks who intermarried with Arabs right after the Arab conquest. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black before the Arab conquest. But before the Arab conquest came the Greeks. It was the ancient Egyptian population was in Egypt for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptian population was brown and black. And the Greeks came in 300 BC, and they started to intermarry with the local population, and then the Romans came and ruled from 70 BC until they were conquered the Arabs and they made the pigmentation of the Egyptians, the Copts, much lighter because of this intermarriage with Europeans.
Images of Nubians being captured and defeated in battle have been used by some to suggest Egyptians had a natural hatred or hostility towards Nubians in general. But when examining the archaeological evidence, we begin to see a story that is much more complex.
Because it's the view that would be put up walls of temples and on the walls of the tombs of the elites. That was an official, let's say, state-sanctioned view. That bore little to no resemblance to what people actually may have thought. It was the official view. So when you look at Nubia as depicted on the walls of temples in Egypt, you will see Nubians being crushed under the chariot wheels of the king. You will see Nubians being dragged back to Egypt enslaved. What we see on the ground in terms of archaeological evidence is quite different. We see people who had Nubian names, people who were using Nubian material culture, living within Egypt, working in Egypt, marrying people with Egyptian names. So something quite different from the very intense militaristic scenes that you see in temples.
There's a deep shared ancestry in the Sahara of these societies. The fact that they were sometimes in conflict, we should not impose our reasons, our ways of thinking onto why this conflict may have occurred. The conflicts were political, social, probably over the same issues. Let's not read ideological ideas about the reason of this conflict back into the past.
There were many different ethnic groups within Nubia, such as the people of Wawat, the Medjay, and the Kushites, some of which Kemet had rivalries with, and some who had alliances. The Medjay served in the army as administrators and as the police force within Upper Egypt, and intermarriage was common. The Kushites, on the other hand, were a formidable foe, and wars broke out between the two throughout the ages. But to sum up all Nubians together as one ethnic group was a mistake, one that was not made by the ancient. Western academia has always been at awe at the customs and splendor of the magic to Egypt, 1787. The great French philosopher Constantine de Volney illustrates this beautifully.
Just think that this race of black men, our slave and the object of our scorn, is the very race to which our arts, sciences, and even the use of speech. Just imagine, finally, that it is that one has approved the most barbarous slavery and questioned whether black men have the same kind of intelligence as whites.
The prototypes of medicine, mathematics, metallurgy, astronomy, philosophy, religion, and the arts were coming to light among the vast ruins of this ancient society. This is a culture shock to a people accustomed to believing for 15 centuries that all learning, all science, and all art had begun with the Greeks. The idea that black Africans were not only civilized, but were highly advanced was a hard pill to swallow. To their past in order to control their future. Over 400 years of propaganda have shaped the mind and biases of the world. In order to tilt the scales of humanity back into balance, we must uncover our hidden history. We must bury outdated ideologies and teach the true origins of civilization.
How much jewelry these people will be wearing, like from head to toe, drenched in jewelry, like from the crowns that the kings wore on their heads with the quotas out. Like it symbolized it's so much more than just jewelry, just pieces of diamonds or gold. These queens and all these other people just wearing it around their necks, showing authority. I just see that big symbol.
If you blink in due time, we gon' be obsolete. We can kill by each other and by the police. It's fucked up. Trust what? The judicial system. Fuck you bragging about? Do your homework. It's time to make this fight folk to your dirt. I ain't racist, I'm just stating what we all know. Black folk can never be racist. We ain't strong enough to hold y'all back for generations. Fuck your 40 acres. One nation under God. Feel like it's one land under Satan. Nigga, take it one day at a time. That's what they always say to niggas. But another black man found slain right by the Staples Center.
Oh my God, Jehovah is alive. Those Christians and gods. Oh my God, oh my.
Like these statues, though they don't speak, you can still feel the essence of them in the room and like the power that they held over people. When I look at the statues, it gives me this new perspective of that you don't always get to see. Because when you think of Africa, sometimes you think of poverty, you think of starving children. And it's like rare that you get to see that Africa is full of kings and queens and art and culture.
Oh my God, Jehovah Witness Allah.
Like these statues, though they don't speak, you can still feel and like the power that they held over people. It's me this new perspective of that you don't always get to see. Because you think of Africa, sometimes you think of poverty, you think of children. And it's like rare that you get to see that Africa is full of kings and queens and art and culture.
Oh my God, Jehovah Witness Allah. Sisters and gods. Oh my God, Jehovah Witness Allah.
We went from Israelites to Hebrews to Moors to black to slaves to niggas to Negroes to African American. We went from Israel to Egypt to Northern Africa down the western coast where they rounded up and they was the aliens. And now river was transported. They built the freeway from the canal off the back of our ancestors. Gold stolen from us by Europeans and taught us Webster, taught us that they was better, taught us that we was lesser, and I bet they never take that back, never, ever. Oh my God.
Oh my God.